Former Pentecostal preacher turned atheist Jerry DeWitt recalls his loss of faith and the subsequent termination of his relationship with his wife, friends, and parishioners in DeWitt, Louisiana. This is about an hour.
Truly a pleasure to be with you, and I can't give a high enough or strong enough appreciation to Nosha for your great turnout. Thank you. You have been with me from the very beginning. You've shown me great kindness, and I wouldn't have to talk about it very much longer for me to tear up. So thank you, thank you. Every day I am amazed at how many things that were lost are replaced. And it seems like truly every day people like yourselves are stepping up to replace all of those little lost trinkets throughout my life that I've collected. So thank you for that. Thank you. So give yourself a round of applause for that, please. So I'm going to try to read rather quickly. If you have your Bibles with you, sorry. I don't know if I've read in public without having to say that, so bear with me. If you know anything about me, and you should know probably more than you want to if you've read the book, you'll know that I'm not the world's best reader and probably the world's worst speller. I was the child sitting in the third grade classroom that whenever it would be our duty that day to read, I would literally count the paragraphs on the page and count the seats in front of me. Anybody else ever do that? Just so that I could practice that one paragraph over and over and over again. So I'm going to read this, but instead of just reading it as if I was sitting in a classroom trying to get through it, instead I'm going to read from my heart. So if it sounds a little different sometimes than how maybe you read it, then that's okay. Does that make sense to everybody? So I'm starting on page 179 if you want to follow along. Have to keep in mind that I was desperately trying to believe, desperately trying to stay in faith. I had spent many years as an evangelist, and I had seen what I believed the power of God being demonstrated in these services, these revival services as we called them. And so when I found out that a faith healer was coming to our town or a nearby town, my heart jumped. It was an opportunity for me to maybe relive that same experience, that same level of God's closeness. And I was desperate, and when I drove into that parking lot that night, there was nothing that I wanted more in my life than to feel the same feelings I had felt in the past. So that's where we pick up. It didn't work that way. The disappointment with Brother Pierce brought back the dull hum of doubt in my mind. Brother Pierce's revival had failed to rekindle the feelings of intimacy with God that I'd felt during my early evangelist days. Now, I felt completely disenfranchised from the relationship with God that I'd held very dearly. I'd laid down my life for my personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Until then, even as I had growing doubts on religion and the Pentecostal doctrine, those doubts had no ramifications for Jesus and me personally. Even the loss of confidence in the divine nature of the Bible had not affected my relationship with Jesus, which I had compartmentalized. No matter where I was in my spiritual life, Jesus was a constant companion. I continually sensed His presence. It was easy to close my eyes and visually imagine Jesus being there and listening to me. To see Jesus' hand in things that did or didn't work out, or feel the presence of the Holy Ghost in the form of goosebumps that were like a breeze coming across me physically or internally. A confirmation of Jesus' tangible, permanent presence in my life. With the panic attacks and the understanding of the effects of the nervous system on my perception of reality, that special, personal relationship with Jesus was finally challenged. It was a step too far in my reassessment of my faith. I realized I'd drawn a circle around my relationship with Jesus. It was like a crime scene tape, an area that no one could enter. As I grew older and more skeptical, I internally debated the authorship of the Bible, the fallacies of man-made religion, or questioned the supernaturalism of a healing ministry like Brother Pierce's. But until that moment, my relationship with Jesus had been untouchable. I was truly lost, and I remember thinking, this is what a lost person must feel like. Thank you. Yeah, you can clap. I love clapping. Trust me, you can never clap too much for me. The more the better. So, as many of you who know my story, you know that I dealt with that and I moved on. And I tried to completely reframe my appreciation of Christianity and Christian doctrine and how I could make it work. And I began to see Christianity and the teachings of the Bible more as a metaphor. And when I became the senior pastor of the first church that I truly had complete control and responsibility over, if any pastor ever has control over a church, I tried to address Christianity from that perspective, as if doctrine, as if the Bible itself was simply metaphor, but metaphor that could be used in a way to benefit people. So, picking up in the story, referring to my time at Grace of DeQuincy. But my congregation's skepticism, mixed with a reluctant tolerance to my messages at Grace, was an exceedingly delicate balance that would not hold. When Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in August of 2005 and the floodwaters submerged much of New Orleans soon afterward, I turned my energies towards working with DeQuincy's mayor to open a relief center in town. Early that fall, as membership at Grace grew to nearly 100 members and packed our little building out, I provided food and prayer to a steady stream of Katrina refugees in DeQuincy. A decision that upset a faction of the Dominionists at Grace. Dominionists are extremely conservative Christians inspired by a well-known passage of the New Testament in which God commands Adam and Eve to have dominion over the earth. Some believe in an extremely literal interpretation of Bible doctrine. Therefore, they're infamous for advocating stoning as a punishment. For example, while others fervently await Armageddon. For the Dominionists at Grace, who believed that they were engaged in spiritual warfare with non-believers and those of insufficient doubt, Katrina was the judgment. The surest sign that Armageddon was to come. At its core, the Dominionist interpretation of Katrina, the storm, dominated and demonstrated that if you're not living right by God, then He will refuse to protect you. Of course, that clashed with my message that God loves everyone. I didn't confront the Dominionists directly, instead choosing to minister to the sick and hungry who were refugees from New Orleans. But instead, I fumed at the Dominionist fraction at Grace. Katrina was not about God's judgment. It was about a storm that started as a low-pressure zone that slowly, dangerously grew into a tropical wave of low pressure. Katrina had a natural cause, not a supernatural one. What flooded New Orleans and its citizenry and caused them to go into exile was simply the catastrophic levee system that had been constructed by human hands. Besides, I believe that what we did to help those affected by the storm, not why the storm or its destruction happened, was what mattered. My Katrina-era messages were just blandly positive. I preached that the storm was a moment to prove to God just how loving we could be to one another. But the Dominionists at Grace were furious nevertheless. Are you saying They chided me after Sunday services that it doesn't matter how the people in New Orleans live, that they can be saved if they're alcoholics. I was unflinching in my answer. Yes, I replied sternly. That is exactly what I'm saying. The Dominionists simply shook their heads in disgust at my apostasy. Even though I found a profound sense of fulfillment helping Katrina refugees, my constant clash with the Dominionists lent a feeling at the fall. I realized that many of the folks at Grace held beliefs that were starkly, diametrically different from my own. And that by leading this congregation, I'd be associated with ideas I did not share. There simply wasn't enough time to address every one of these wrong beliefs. And by not shaping their theology or the theology of the congregation, they were going about the business of shaping their theology themselves. My liberal and moderate and tolerant qualities had the unattended effect of providing license to radical voices within Grace to create an atmosphere where like-minded voices could flourish. It was as if I'd built a nativity scene in my front yard and allowed all manner of folks with crazy ideas about Jesus to stand by it and to rant. The neighbors would say, well, if Jerry built it, then he must support what's going on all around it. That's what was happening at Grace. My open-hearted, embracing style was actually enabling bad spiritual habits in the people that I cared for the most. That's the cleanest and clearest explanation I can give of why ministers who have moved away from their supernatural beliefs struggle with this duplicity. Because as much as you want to get up and just preach that Jesus loves everyone, there's an entire religious industry that's working against you. Christian television, Christian radio, Christian literature is actually shaping the theology that you refuse to take in hand. That's usually where I say, can I get a Darwin? One last quick piece, and we'll move into questions. If that's all right. We still got time? We're doing all right time-wise? Okay. So, as a minister who has now completely realized that he's out of place and completely out of sync with his ministry, you'll have to pardon me because the part about the Dominionist is one of the hardest parts for me. Because I honestly don't like the word. It describes a theology that they were adhering to. But these were people that truly believed that what they were doing and what they believed was making a positive difference, not just for the lives of their family, but for their country. And they also loved me. And I loved them. And it made the distance between us almost unbearable. Because if I could have somehow taken away all the things that I had grown to believe or not believe in order to stay in unison with them, I would have done it. I travel across this country and everybody talks about, oh, you're such a hero, you're so brave, you did this and you did that. And you know, the joke I always make is whenever you stop growing at 5'5", you take every compliment you can get. And I love for people to tell me I'm a hero and how brave I've been. But I'm telling you the truth of my heart when I tell you, if I could have undone what I was doing in my own mind and still been an honest person, I would have done it to stay with these people. I loved them. If I could have somehow twisted it in my mind and made Katrina to be something other than low pressure and warm water, and somehow be part of spiritual warfare, I would have done it to stay in fellowship with these people. That's how much I love them. That's one of the most difficult parts of the book for me. I never wanted to be separated from them. But by this time, I am. And just the slightest little remnants of Grace of DeQuincy is still in my life by now. But just after midnight, on a still cold night that May, I was thrust right back into the crisis of faith I'd labored so hard to avoid. The roar of a box fan in a corner of our bedroom had finally lulled me to sleep when my cell phone, which I had just silenced, lit up brightly with an incoming call. As I reached over the antique rectangle-shaped wooden nightstand where my phone rested, my heart raced. I'd take dozens of late-night calls over my more than 2 decades in the ministry. I knew that good news never arrived at this time of night. When I focused my eyes on the phone, I saw the name of the caller and my spirit sank. It was Natasha Davis, who ran the soundboard at Grace of DeQuincy. Natasha was truly like a part of my family. I'd entered her phone number into my phone under the name Natasha Davis / DeWitt. Though she stood at just barely 5 foot tall, we'd lovingly nicknamed her our Little D. Her huge smile, quick-wittedness, and willingness to assist the church with everything from the sound system to our youth group lent her an outsized presence at our church. As a pastor of a small church like Grace of DeQuincy, anyone who wants to help is appreciated, but a strong talent and vibrant spirit like Natasha's is an absolute treasure. "Natasha," I whispered as I picked up the phone so as not to wake Kelly. "Yes," Natasha stammered. Even though she barely said a word, I could tell that she was already in tears. I slipped my shoes on, headed down the staircase, walked silently through the foyer and into the tiny bathroom, our guest bedroom, as to let Kelly continue sleeping. I stood uncomfortably between the baby blue colored bathtub and the bathroom sink, which was illuminated by a strip of round light bulbs above a mirror that made the bathroom, which we hadn't had the money to renovate, resemble a tacky backstage dressing room in a theater. Maybe you've got one of those. As I steadied myself at the sink, Natasha told me that her brother had been severely injured in a motorcycle accident in the Lake Charles area. Natasha tearfully explained that the ER physicians had failed to revive her brother and that specialists were on their way. Listening to Natasha, I envisioned her standing outside the hospital and having reached that moment that we have all journeyed to in our lives when inquiries to nurses and doctors about a loved one's health have been exhausted and our ability to make the situation any better is depleted. It's at that moment when you call your pastor in hopes of bringing God's grace and perhaps a resolution to a moment that is steadily speeding towards tragedy. I knew that she wanted me to pray for her brother's condition to improve and for her to have the strength to weather the storm, to pray that she was able to do the right things and to not lose it amidst her family's tragedy. But Natasha didn't say any of this. She didn't even say, "Will you pray for me, Jerry?" She didn't have to. Any pastor worth his salt wouldn't let the conversation go that far. The second that anguish calls arrives, it is the pastor's job to pray. It's just like when a friend or family member initiates a hug and embrace is understood and instinctual between two people who care for one another. So asking for a hug renders it meaningless. I had no doubt in my mind what my role was as I listened to Natasha's tearful telling of her brother's motorcycle wreck. Yet I could not pray. And every second that went by without my prayer for Natasha and her brother felt like an eternity. A profound span of time when Natasha, one of the most beloved members of my former congregation, was left hopeless and without spiritual reassurance she so desperately and rightly craved. I struggled to pray because all of the conflicts that had existed inside of me about my faith, which I'd temporarily resolved time and time again through my motivation to remain in the ministry, suddenly fused into an awareness that there was no God. But I could not pray for Natasha because I loved her so deeply. and could not bear setting her up for the kind of crushing disappointment I'd witnessed with Grover and Bobby, an aunt and an uncle of mine who had went through a horrible tragedy. I'd witnessed with Grover and Bobby's unanswered prayer over my cousin Geary, or my own prayers for Larry Smith's sick brother. If I prayed for Natasha and her brother didn't make it, it wouldn't be me who had disappointed her. It would be God who let her down. I didn't want to initiate in Natasha the long and painful journey of doubt that I had experienced. For the first time, I turned to reason. Natasha, I said in a calm, reassuring voice, it sounds like everyone at the hospital is doing everything they can. Your brother's a young man and a strong man. They're bringing in specialists, so we're going to just have to wait this out and see what happens. But Natasha, I'm telling you, it sounds like he's going to be all right. Natasha thanked me for taking the call so late at night and for encouraging words. Then, just before we made our goodbyes, Natasha said, keep him in your prayers. I paused for a moment and then replied, of course, Natasha, of course. When I hung up the phone, I was heartbroken. I knew that I deeply disappointed Natasha. I realized in that moment that if I could not pray for a person who was so near and dear to me, then my dream of returning to the ministry was over. I'd given up on preaching after Cut and Shoot, Texas, believe it or not. But the ministry remained a far-off, remote possibility. Now there was no ministry left. I stared into the bathroom mirror. I was in tears. DeWitt, I angrily said to myself, who the hell are you? It was done. It was over. I couldn't continue to fool myself into thinking that I'd one day find some form of Christianity or Christian ministry to participate in. I'd bounced from denomination to denomination, from a liberal Bible interpretation to an embrace of Christianity as metaphor, and I'd finally reached the conclusion of that quest. I was looking at an atheist standing there looking in the mirror. It was a painful realization, but the next moments literally tore my soul apart. There in the guest bathroom, I said 3 final goodbyes to my loved ones, to my cousin, Geary, my grandfather, and my father. I think that's as far as I can go with this. Thank you. So is it time for questions and answers? Good. Come around. Making your way to the mic. Oh, you're coming over this way? Anybody have any questions? If so, please. Do you mind making your way to the microphone? Might as well. It's okay. You're going to be on camera regardless.
I was curious what you made of an experience that you recount in the earlier part of the book. When you were still believing and still practicing, you talk about some very eerie, almost psychic experiences, like knowing what hospital someone was in that needed praying over, and even finding the room they're in. And what do you make out of that kind of experience now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What he's referring to is, in the book, I tell the story of a pastor's relative who was suffering from an aneurysm. And I felt, as we would say in those days, I felt led of God to go and pray for this person. And I didn't want to just pray, obviously. I wanted to see this person healed. And that's a big thing. And I was wrestling with this concept in my Pentecostal doctrine at the time, that if I could get the mind of God, I would do more than just pray. I would actually have God's confirmation that He was going to heal this person. And if I didn't know that God had already agreed to heal the person, then I wouldn't go pray. I felt like the reason there was, so many unanswered prayers is because we were praying for things that were outside of the will of God. And so I prayed all night long. All night long I prayed, asking God to confirm to me whether He would heal this person. And in what I felt like at the time was a vision, I felt as if I received confirmation that He would do so. The problem was I didn't know enough information about the young lady to track down which hospital she was in, much less which room she was in. This was a minister that I knew vaguely. And so the only thing I did know was that the person who told me about the sick woman actually told me the town that the lady was in. And so the next day, my wife and I, we got in our four-door Buick LeSabre and we drove to that town, a very large town. We drove there not knowing which hospital to stop at. And from the interstate, on an overpass, I saw a hospital. And I felt in my mind at that time a magnetic pull to that hospital. And so we pulled in the parking lot, we went in through the lobby, we found the elevators, we got into the elevators, and I just pressed a button. To this day, I still don't remember which floor I pressed. We came out on this open floor filled with nurses and patients. We walked down the corridor. When we would, meet an intersection, I would simply pray and try to get a feel for which direction God was leading me. I'd feel a magnetic, and when I say magnetic, something internally pulling me. I would take that pathway. Eventually, these turns left and right led to a dead end where I felt like a complete imbecile. But instead, I went ahead and I pushed open the door. And when I pushed open the door, there was the pastor. And there was his sick relative laying in the bed. And to me, it was a fulfillment of the confirmation that I had gotten the night before. So instead of walking in and saying a prayer of like, God, would you please heal this person? I looked at this almost lifeless body and I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, be thou healed. And a few days later, she was out of the hospital. And so this gets people. And they're like, why the heck did you write that book? It sounds like that you've got more proof than most people that God exists. And this is the power of coincidence. Because I don't remember all of the times that I felt like God led me down a pathway that ended up being a true dead end. But I definitely remember this one. So this was a hit and not a miss. And part of our human psychology, of course, is to remember the hits and not the misses. And this is a big miss. I mean, a big hit, and it's really, really awesome, and it's a really wonderful and beautiful story, and I'm really glad that it turned out the way it was, that it did. But the reality of it is, it really was a very profound coincidence. And that's why we remember it. And that's how I contributed, was that it was a coincidence. Next. Don't be shy. Yes, please. And what's interesting as he's coming up is that we base so much of our life and our life's decisions on much smaller coincidences. You go to the bar, sit on the bar stool, and the first person who walks up, you think God sent them into your life, and 3 years later, you know it was the devil who did instead.
This question is kind of in the same vein, because when I first, in the first part of your book, I didn't know how you're going to dig your way out of this, like that, and also the voices you heard,
yes.
and like the messages you got that were, really affected you, and you heard them, and
yes.
you said you heard them, and I think you even saw you had a vision or something like that, and I kept waiting, for you to explain that, and at the end you kind of say something like, anxiety attacks, neurological, didn't know what.
Yeah.
But do you still remember them as actual things that happened to you? And how do you explain it if you still...
As far as like receiving messages or hearing the voice of God?
Voices.
Yeah, hearing the voice of God. In particular, the one time that we talk about in the book where I truly believe that I had heard the voice of God. There was a lot of times throughout my life that to me the voice of God was an internal thought. It was a very, very loud thought in my mind. In the book, we do talk about where I heard the voice of God, and I thought I heard the voice of God with my own ears. Whenever you read the book, you're with me through that whole story. You know that by the time that moment happens, life is about as messed up as life can be.
It's in a trailer, right?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't hold it against the trailer. It's a great trailer. Yeah. But no, you're exactly right. I was in my mother's mobile home, and But I really believe that I was completely emotionally exhausted. I think my nervous system was a complete and total wreck. I think I was so desperate for direction. And from the very moment that what you're relaying is I had been asked to move 1,000 miles away to Des Moines, Iowa to be a student minister. And I was praying to get God's direction for that because it's such a big deal. Looking back on it now, I can tell that the moment I was asked, I thought I should do it. But I didn't want to do it. There was so many parts of me that did not want to make that kind of commitment, didn't want to leave my family, didn't want to go through all the pain and struggle you go through moving that far. But there was another part of me, a very strong part of me, that knew I was supposed to do it. So by the time that I get to that very weakened state, emotionally and physically, I think it was just, I think it was like a hallucination at that point. And that was the reason why it was so much louder and clearer than all of the very strong impressions that I had had years previously. But as far as reading the Bible and feeling as if I was hearing messages from God as far as the way that my speeches or my messages should be laid out, I think I was just naturally born incredibly clever. Not a good reader, but I think I'm good at finding messages.
I got one more question.
Sure.
Can you still speak in tongues?
Yes.
Can you?
Oh, absolutely.
Could you do that?
No.
Oh, come on.
No. That's going to be a really big event when I finally do that publicly. What I always say is I can't do it as long as my grandmother's alive.
All right.
I just can't do it. With enough of that, I might could. Yeah. I definitely could, and I have, since coming to the conclusion, coming to the realization that I'm an atheist. And that's something that I always try to point out anytime that I have the public's attention, is that atheism is not a choice. It's a realization that you discover about yourself. And so even since then, I'm still able to do it. And there's been some times that it's happened spontaneously, obviously, because I don't set out in the evenings to say I think I'm going to go speak in tongues. But I've had very emotional moments, riding down the interstate with the music just exactly right and have an extremely pleasant and heartwarming thought and an old pattern. It's just a neurological pathway. Just boom, just pops up, and there you are. And it's actually still very pleasurable.
Thanks.
Unless you're caught in public doing it, Who's next? Yes, sir. You said you were leaving earlier than that.
I have 8 minutes to get to boot camp. So my question is this. A lot of people are they are tied to religious beliefs. And they have just been brought up to think these things. And it's going to be very, very hard to get them to think about things logically, rationally, reasonably. So I've heard a lot of times, being African American, African Americans are really, really tied to their religious beliefs.
Absolutely.
And for me, we are some of the most praying individuals I know.
Sure.
And given all of the praying that we do, you would think that our plight in America would be different.
Right.
We would have some favor of some sort, but we do not.
Right.
So my question is this: how do you replace? Because I think with African Americans and not necessarily just African Americans, people who have like a historical connection to their religious beliefs, and it's just been there for years. You're going to have to replace it with something, and so what are your thoughts about that? Yeah. Must it be replaced with something? Because I'm just a person who's I need reason and I need science, and that's all I need. And but other people, it's about patterns. They see patterns and they want to say that those patterns are something religious and something of God. It's just a pattern. Right. So my question is, what would we want to replace it with, or what would we need to replace it with, so that people can let go of it?
Right. For me, that's a very good question. And for me, there's two different parts to that. So if you have to make it to boot camp, while I'm talking, I understand I'm long-winded. The first thing is, I don't think we have to replace it. I think that's something that we need to get very well established within the secular community, is that the only reason we feel like we have to replace it is because it is such a long-standing part of our heritage. Had the religion never been there in the first place, then we wouldn't be having to figure out what to replace religion with or religious experiences with. We would just be living a total different type of life, and culture would have developed a different way. So I don't think we have to replace it. But if we choose to replace it, if we feel like that we will benefit in some way to replace it, what prayer, there's certain aspects of prayer that I don't think can be replaced. Because if you, when you pray, you truly believe and thus feel that you have the attention of an outsider who is going to work on your behalf, whether he does it in the way that you want him to or not, well then obviously there's no way to replace that if you don't think there's someone outside of our reality. So I just think that can't be done. But if instead, if what prayer is doing for you, it is centering you and putting you in the moment, then there are many practices that we know from all types of cultures that allow human beings to do that. That works just as effectively with our neurology as prayer does from our particular background. So I do it all the time. All the time, when I feel myself slipping into a rut and getting completely out of control, I'll do things as simple as whenever I place my hand on something new, like the coldness of this metal, I will bring my awareness to the fact that I'm feeling this sensation, and it brings me into the moment. And many times prayer is able to either bring you into the moment or make you feel like you transcend it. And there's just an unending array of practices that do that do not depend upon the supernatural. For me, martial arts is one of them.
Yeah, and I get that for the latter one, but I think most individuals who are just totally tied to religion, they're on that first one.
Yes.
They're thinking that something is going to come and get them and save them out of a situation.
Exactly.
And I think that is very, very, very harmful to people. And
it
doesn't allow people to really be able to get themselves and move themselves, and it doesn't allow them to be empowered.
Right. And that's no, you're right. And that's
I'm just saying in general.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And what that is an archetype that exists within our culture right now. And so what we're doing, intentionally and unintentionally, we're creating a new archetype. We're creating a type of person within our culture that does feel empowered, personally empowered, without putting that dependence upon anything supernatural. So, though that may be a very slow way to get to where we're talking about going, hopefully, one of these days, that will be common, that people will feel empowered on their own. Yeah. Very good question. Thank you.
I actually have two questions.
The more the better.
My first question is, moving forward, it's obvious that you are taking different steps. So what is your vision for a secular community, both in Louisiana and in the larger arena? Okay. And then my second question is, what do you say when somebody sneezes?
Oh, I feel like to get past it, I probably ought to answer the second one first. Someone sneezed next to me yesterday, and it took everything I could do not to say God bless you. And the only reason that I don't say God bless you is because of how mad it makes other people, other atheists. Because I don't have a problem with saying God bless you, because I just see it as words. I know some people do, and that's fine. But I know, especially coming from the Deep South, I know that when all of the years, for 43 years, when someone sneezed near me and I said God bless you, I know what I meant. And I know what I didn't mean. And what I didn't mean was, may Yahweh give you a bountiful harvest. I truly didn't mean for Jehovah to bless anyone. It's just culture. And so I'll use that to segue into the first question. Did I politically avoid that well enough? I'm not sure. To me, this is about culture, and my vision is about culture. Golly, I'm going to get in so much trouble. I always do, obviously. There wouldn't be a book if I avoided trouble, I guess. There's just so many things that parts of the secular movement seem to be offended by or worried about that I just don't worry about. And some of them I consider to be truly cultural. And I don't see winning a positive future. This is where I'm really going to get in trouble, but what do I have to lose, right? I don't see winning for our side if we're on sides. I don't see winning as the annihilation of religion. I don't. What I would like to see is for us to develop a culture where people can be comfortable being cultural Christians, just like they're cultural everything else, where they stop taking it seriously, where it's just part of their heritage, it's part of what they do on Christmas or Thanksgiving, and they're not trying to vote in politicians who then enforce policies so we all have to do the same thing on Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? Where it just becomes a very cultural thing. And we say, oh, you remember the days when we really took all that stuff seriously? You know, isn't it fun now that we can just, you know, whatever? That's what I see. So, in order to answer your first question, my vision is to work within community and the culture that already exists within community. So, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, I've had people who have asked for us to start a secular church. And that word right there causes all these red flags. And yeah, exactly, gives people the shivers. You know, and it will for a lot of people. Because this isn't, you know, our desire isn't to create a new movement or to do something extraordinary outside of the movement, but just within the short year and a half that I've been involved in the secular movement, I've realized this need was already existing for very particular people with very particular personalities, and so I want to meet that need. And the way that we'll meet it is by looking at what is culturally significant. Does it matter to people for their families to be able, for the mom and dad and the kids to all be able to go and attend a meeting on Sunday morning? Is that a cultural thing? Or is that the end of the world that leads to supernaturalism and Armageddon? You know, well, it may just be cultural for some people. And so that's my vision, is to figure out exactly what will meet the needs for people within our Deep South culture. That's my vision. And so we've already founded the Community Mission Chapel in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You know, had our inaugural service in Baton Rouge just a couple of weeks ago, and many of you were there, and I appreciate it very much. So that's kind of, hope that answers it.
Where are y'all going to meet in Lake Charles?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, it's a tricky question, because the question was, where are we going to meet in Lake Charles? And what we're already finding is just this idea. The media, of course, frames it as atheist church. You know, which there's no such thing as bad press, so whatever, you know. But that's not the way we look at it. We look at it as a church service that focuses on secular values. That's how we're looking, without any hint towards supernaturalism. The problem that we're running into is that there's so much backlash within the Lake Charles community that it's difficult to find someone that we can pay our deposit to and know for a fact that they're going to let us come in and have service whenever all the protesters show up. And so we're trying to work that out. We'll have our first service, or won't be our first, but we'll have our first service in Lake Charles at the end of August. Yeah. And so we'll make sure everybody knows where it's at. And hopefully they have good insurance. Yeah.
Jerry, can you describe a meeting of your new congregation?
Yes. It looks, I won't go as far as to say that it looks like a Pentecostal service, because that might be a little too much for everybody but me, you know. But it looks like a really fun Baptist church service, you know. And that's me. I'm always cutting on the Baptist. It's a Pentecostal thing. You'll have to, you know. I can't tell you how many Baptists have written to me. It's like, you know, we love the Lord too. I say, I know, but not as much as we Pentecostals do, you know. So there's music, you know, like for instance in Baton Rouge, we opened, we had jazz music playing in the background while everyone was fellowshipping and finding, you know, their place. And it did open up with a Dawkins video, you know, not a picture of him per se, but with his voice in the background and this beautiful tour through the solar system, talking about how wonderful it is to be alive. You know, that's the whole point, is figuring out, our culture is the absolute best, most particularly within the United States, of celebrating the moment and celebrating life. And we want to continue to do that. And that's something that a lot of our churches in the Deep South are very good at, is also enjoying the moment and celebrating life. So it looks celebratory. You know, we had some fun music that people could sing along to, which was, I think, very important. A lot of times you'll go to secular meetings and it's more set up like a concert, where everybody's just listening to someone else sing. Well, that's not what you do in good church. In good church, everybody's able to sing along, so we did that. Of course, you had fantastic preaching. I'm not going to mention who our guest speaker was so they don't get, a big head, but I thought he did a good job. And so it really looks like church. It really does. And the message is about secular values and about appreciation of the moment that we're actually living in, and not a hope of, another life after this one. But really our goal, particularly like Charles, what we say is if a spiritualist comes in, if a religionist shows up, if they leave offended, it's only because of what they didn't hear or they didn't see happen. Because it's not our desire to be anti-anything. We want to be pro-life. So that was a horrible pun, but there you go. So any other questions, please? Oh, yes.
One more. I was curious about your universalism.
Yes.
It's something that you really chafe at, trying to make it work with Christianity, and you just have this natural, you want everybody to be saved.
I do.
But you grew up with Pentecostals and Baptists who were pretty serious.
Yes.
You could easily have gone that dominionist route.
Sure.
So where did that come from?
They fooled me. They completely fooled me. At the kitchen table, they fooled me. They misled me. My grandmother, she really was, in my mind, the most Christ-like person to ever live, and still is in so many ways. And so growing up sitting at the table, primarily because of her presence and her personality, I really did think that we loved everybody, And so I wasn't even per se getting mixed signals, because I wasn't getting into the Pentecostal doctrine as a child. I knew that we had a Pentecostal lifestyle where we wore the long sleeves and, didn't have facial hair and all those kind of things. But at the same time, I watched my grandmother just, without exception, love everyone. And everyone was accepted to our kitchen table. And so somewhere in the midst of being raised like that, and her being my model for Christ, I just naturally assumed that everybody was welcome at the Lord's table, as they were, not after some great, long, extensive initiation, that they were accepted just as they were. So it really was to my surprise at 17 when I began to preach Pentecostal doctrine and begin to really pay attention to the messages that I was then hearing, that it was really difficult to be saved. Being saved was a real task. Being lost was real easy. And so I really struggled with that concept. And quoting Mike Williams from Houston, Texas, I quickly realized that my heart was kinder than my doctrine. So I ferociously looked for doctrines that biblically supported universalism. And they're very, very easy to find. And there's a good bit of valuable Christian history that would make you believe that many of the fathers in the early church were universalist, that they saw the sacrifice of Christ as saving all mankind, not just those who lined up and did right. Yeah, so universalism was very important. Bishop Carlton Pearson, the inclusion movement, these people, they were very, very important to me. And I, every time that I would hit a stumbling block, as far as, say, even the Bible and it being fallible, that only drove me closer to what I thought was a relationship with God, not further away. Because I was looking around and it was so obvious. And I mean, this is one of those forest for the trees kind of things. As I looked around, it was so obvious Christianity doesn't work. I mean, it's just not working. It's not making the world better. It's not ending human suffering. It's not even making the participants, their personal lives, that much better. And so I kept thinking, but that doesn't mean that there's not some form of Christianity that would. And I was egotistical enough to think that I was the guy called in this day and age to figure it out and to bring the world back to the true message of Jesus Christ. And I thought universalism was a big part of that for a long time. It's amazing to have this much ego in such a small body. Doesn't seem possible. Yes, ma'am. I'll repeat it for you.
Okay. My question is that the Clergy Project exists for you, or existed for you, and exists for other clergy
Yes.
to go and feel safe. Are there plans for the regular guy kind of place for people to go to get that? I don't think that people necessarily even feel comfortable coming to your service.
Right.
Because the people down the street will see them walking to the building.
Yeah.
So,
I think there's a lot of different services that already exist. You know, like for instance, Recovering from Religion. They have even anonymous forums. You can go to their website and you can go into an anonymous forum, much like we were able to do with the Clergy Project, and meet people in a way that hopefully won't jeopardize your life at all. So there's a lot of different places. You know, I've received recently fantastic support from the Foundation Beyond Belief. And so that's for people who are really interested in charitable activities and how, even though they're now out of religion, that they may even be able to contribute to interfaith, you know, charities that are trying to do good. So the fantastic thing about the secular movement right now, I mean, even the Be Secular campaign that's going on, the fantastic thing about all of these different projects is that it's really addressing the uniqueness of the individual. To where so often in religion, it's cookie cutter, and religion, from my experience, tries to shape you into something that fits, to where right now the secular movement is so broad that almost regardless of what your personality is or what your life need is, you can find your niche and you can find resources to help. It's amazing, all of the different resources. I mean, I know that NOSHA does a fantastic work for that and connects back with, you know, the American Humanist Association. So there's truly something for everybody. There really is. I've been very impressed. Don't let me go now. I'm enjoying it. That'd be a short sermon if that was. Any questions towards our process of writing the book? Since the co-writer is here, I'd love to involve him. Of course, we've got the Clergy Project. We've got.
How did you all work together?
How did we work together? Ethan, you want to take that one? You want to come around? You can come over to this and stand with me if you want.
So what was the question? Sorry.
The process. Just he asked, how did we work together?
How did we work together? Very quickly.
You want to stand over here?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
We worked together very quickly. Jerry, as maybe some of you know, was in the New York Times Magazine last, was it August?
August of 2012.
Of 2012.
Right.
And he actually got a number of book deal offers just based on that article without a single sentence of writing.
There's all kinds of reasons to hate me.
I mean, and I told Jerry how incredibly rare that is. Like, if you're a person who believes in God, for example.
That's right. It's even better than the hospital story.
Yeah, it's vastly better than the hospital story, actually. Getting book deal offers based on no book proposal, not a single piece of writing, is really far beyond the hospital story. So anyway, he had received all these offers and was obviously looking for help in putting this all together, right. Because you've been ministering and preaching, but haven't been writing books your whole life. So we happen to have an agent in common, and even though this meaning religion and atheism is not something that I'm typically known for at all, our mutual agent basically put us together, mostly I think based on the fact that we both are down here in Louisiana.
In the South,
yeah. And of course the catch with something great like getting a lot of book deal offers is that there's always something.
There's a trade-off, yeah.
There's always something else that you have to kind of sacrifice, and the sacrifice was, given the high-profile nature of the piece about Jerry, was the publisher wanted the project pretty much immediately.
Yeah, 4 months.
So we just set about through Skype, just banging it out. And fortunately, what's I think so remarkable about Jerry is that he's so magnificent in speaking, so great with words at it, that it just kind of, the book was sort of preached out by Jerry with actually, I feel like Jerry always says, like, I couldn't have done done this without you, et cetera, and I just feel like a kind of funnel at best for Jerry's preaching. So that's kind of the way the book worked. Yeah.
So how long did it take y'all then?
Not very long at all, shockingly. An actual number, let's see, anywhere in the 4 to 6
4 months was our
period.
first. 4 months.
But that's not including editing and everything else. So 6, and that's not 6 months of everyday work, obviously, either. It's over a span of that time.
Yeah,
so,
we had a draft in about 4 months.
Yeah, a really unfortunate draft. So yeah, I mean, about 6 months. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the kind of thing that you're hearing and seeing now with his, Q&A session, which I think is wonderful. It was the same sort of thing, and just talking to Jerry.
It was therapeutic. It really was. In the very beginning, I had this audacious idea that I might, just put all of these words on paper and Ethan could spell check them, or something like that.
Right.
And that didn't last very long at all. It was so obvious that I would just put too much. I remember one of the first times I sent like 10,000 words to Ethan, and he sent back like 4,000 words and 50 questions, and I was like, it is so obvious I don't know what I'm doing here, and so over time, like you said, when we got into Skyping, I can't tell you how therapeutic that was. Everybody should write a book. I mean that. I mean, even if you don't have a book deal, even if you're not an ex-preacher, write the book of your life, because it was so incredibly therapeutic. I feel so sorry for him, because on Skype I would just be boo-hooing. I would just be crying, oh my God, and he'd be like, it's okay, it's all right. Take your time. So, anyway.
If you had a year, do you have any vision? I'm asking a lot about vision questions. Do you have a vision about what might be different if you had had more time?
Actually, the question was, would things be different if we had longer to write the book? And actually, I don't think so. I think that the structure of the book and the way everything played out is pretty much how
life went.
How your life went. Yeah. I mean, I of course, and this is how I am with everything that I do. I'm always deeply unhappy at things that I feel like could be edited in the end, or too long, or like, why did I use this particular word choice? But I feel like that's writer's regret that you just live with everything. I actually don't look at any of my books really ever for that reason, because I find it really upsetting. All I see in them is the things I don't like.
Yeah.
So, would there be things that I would change? Yes, absolutely. I feel that way about everything that I've ever done,
Yeah.
But I don't think that the time frame is relevant necessarily to that idea, if that makes sense.
And we were fortunate that I'd been on, secular tour, if you will, for a little while. And so I'd had several opportunities I was forced by these opportunities to kind of think my way through the story. And so I'll never forget, in the very beginning, Ethan was like, this is just insane. This cannot happen. This time frame is too short. And I felt like it was because, in the past he's had to just pull so much information out of other people that he's worked with. So I think that was a big benefit. The story was there, in some form anyway. But it was also very grueling, because he would have me go back and he'd be like, what did this look like? What do you remember about that? And I'm like, I'm too old. I can't. It was so long ago. It takes a lot out of you. You really relive your entire life, which I'm very thankful that happened. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess I'm not trying to out you, but I want to compare. Just I'm thinking of this question, how is working with Jerry different from the work that you've done with your being an investigator, working with folks around these other issues in the death penalty, where you may be going in for one shot with a witness, or maybe two, and visiting these really intense subjects, but then you're gone, whereas you had all of these one-on-one conversations with him.
Yeah, I mean, so the question is, how does the comparison of my past experience as an investigative reporter and investigator compare with working with Jerry? And the answer to that is, I've thought a little bit about it. The answer is that on the one hand, it's vastly different, particularly on the investigative reporting side, where like I've written 3 investigative reporting driven books about specific crimes, and those books were all like unbelievably difficult to put together because I was dealing with dozens of people to interview, thousands of pages of like court documents, people who were very angry with me for contacting them, people who wanted to kill me, things like that. So like on the one hand, it was like very different to be able to just have a single source, obviously being Jerry, and then have that single source be available all the time. So that actually made the process like remarkably easy by comparison to my past work.
And I wasn't a criminal.
Yeah. So that's how it was different. But in terms of it being the same, what was interesting to me is that like my background isn't in religion or writing about the secular community. Yeah. But the thing that I really liked about Jerry and his story, and I didn't find this out until I started working with Jerry, was how driven by humanism Jerry is, and how unwilling he's been to this day to write off people in his life who had vastly different views than he holds. And that really struck a deep chord with me, particularly like after I wrote my last book, I became an investigator in the death penalty community. And actually, in some weird way, I feel like a lot of the people that I deal with are similar. not the defendants or the clients, but the world around those folks. Like I deal with very, very religious people, like all the time, and I have a deep love and respect for those people, even though I don't at all share their view of life. And I think, just when you were talking about the Dominionists, for example, like your love of them, even though you're across this chasm, ideologically, is very much how I feel about a lot of the people that I work with day to day. I mean, I think that I encounter some of the most forgiving and loving and unbelievably caring and beautiful people in the world, almost on a daily basis in my job. Yet they're at a ideological and religious place that's in a different universe than I'm at. Yeah. So I feel like on the one hand, the investigative reporting stuff is so vastly different than Jerry, but on the other hand, my immersion in this world, in doing criminal investigations in Louisiana, where I'm just around a lot of religious people who I love, also gives me that kind of connection to Jerry's experience.
The Dominionist part is the hardest part of the book for me. Yeah. If I don't have a least favorite, but if I was going to have a least favorite, that would be it, because it's an important part of the story that needs to be told. Right. But it's the least flattering of every encounter that I have, I think, throughout the entire book, and it's very, very hard to tell both sides of that particular situation, just because I do love them all so much. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Sure.
Yeah. What keeps coming to my mind, I left the Methodist. I told you I left the Methodist Church, the Unitarian Church. I'm attending an Episcopal church. I have enjoyed. I like the music and the architecture, but I read the book by Bugliosi, Divinity of Doubt. He was the DA for L.A. F. Lee Bailey said he was the best attorney in the country. He prosecuted over 200 cases, only lost 2, but he was ex-Catholic. But his book is arguing that neither the theists nor the atheists can prove their case. And I read a book by Rob Bell, and I can't remember the title now. My memory's not what it used to be, but
I know Rob Bell, sure.
in fact, I have a family history of Alzheimer's. But he is arguing that, well, he starts out with, we're struggling with spiritual stuff. So he starts with the material world and shows how modern astronomy and physics, the material world is not at all what we think it is.
Right.
Subatomic particles can be in two places at different ones at the same time. And he says, if you're not upset by that, you're not listening to what's being said. They're talking about 11 dimensions. We only experience 4 multiverses and so on.
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is it puzzles me. How can one be secular, say there is no meaning beyond what we experience with our senses, so to speak?
Right.
Given all this, it's very disappointing when one concept of God is disillusioning for us, but does that mean that there is no other concept of the meaning of life and the universe?
Right. That's a fair question, and I get it all the time, because it is such a good question. I have a little creed that I say, and that's a word that some people don't like, but I like it. It sounds cute, creed, and it is that skepticism is my nature, free thought is my methodology, agnosticism is my conclusion, and that's the answer to what you're saying right there, that after 25 years of spiritual pursuits, I came out on the other end of that agnostic, simply meaning I know that I don't know, and I don't know if I will know. And so that's my conclusion. Right. And then the end of that creed is that atheism is my opinion. Now, if at some time they are able to crack quantum physics to such a degree that the laser pierces through the 11th dimension and bounces off of the face of God and we get a picture of Jesus, then my opinion will change. But until that happens, then it's an opinion, and it's simply opinions. The other fact of that is that theist and atheist are not coming at this from two different directions. Theists are making a claim, and atheists aren't. Atheists are simply saying to theists, I don't see your evidence for your claim. That's it. So they're not equal and they're not balanced as far as being two different arguments.
Are the atheists saying there is no God?
No. The atheist is saying, I don't see one. The atheist is saying, I don't see a God. They can't at any time, no one can ever say there is no 12th dimension where God does live. But since we haven't seen that yet, then we're going to do our best to enjoy the 4 that we're experiencing. And enjoy what we can enjoy. It's not, obviously there are all different types of atheists who say all different types of things and come at things from all different types of ways based on their personality. But a person needs to, if they're going to engage in these discussions, they really need to become very clear about what the definitions are and what the definitions aren't. Outside of that, it's really cultural themes that play against each other.
Well, I mentioned Margaret Johnson to you earlier. I just read her book on Faith Beyond Belief. 10 people who left their church. And also stages of spiritual maturity. And she talks about atheists, Dawkins and the atheist writers.
Is there any other atheists besides Dawkins? There's a couple of others.
She uses the analogy of binary logic in computers, yes, no, on or off, electric circuits. And she's arguing that they're using that kind of logic, which is not sophisticated or enough to consider all these spiritual issues.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. There's a lot of different arguments that people make. Some are, I'm afraid some of them transcend the actual argument itself. Sometimes we look so far outside of the scope of what we're actually talking about that we completely lose contact with the actual subject. And the actual subject is that by and large atheists are people that if they use the phrase, I don't believe there is a God, they don't mean belief in the form of choice, the same way that people choose by faith to accept a doctrine or to accept something supernatural that they can't prove. Instead, they're simply saying, I've been honest with myself, and I honestly just don't believe that. And so it's totally outside of the realm of religious experience. But in our very bipolar culture and bipartisan culture, we're never going to do that. The argument's always going to bounce between extremes to make our own point.
I'm skeptical like you.
Yeah.
I've had coffee groups at my house with two Unitarians, two Episcopalians, one an MD who's active in the Episcopal Church, arguing, well, the Bible says these people saw Jesus alive after he was born.
Yeah.
And I responded, well, how many people said they saw Elvis alive?
The king's alive.
And then I go back to, I read Arthur Janoff's Primal Psychology. I even went to Santa Monica, something with him, because he is the God thing. You know, it's a neurotic thing. His ex-wife, Vivian, in a large group said, well, we've had a lot of Mormons come through therapy and recover from their neuroses, and they still continued on with the Mormon church. We're all individuals. She also said what the Catholic Church has done to the sexuality of so many people and so on. But because he said, he talks about the physiology of the brain structure.
Okay.
And whatever traumas we have as an infant or birth or early childhood, if they're not released or resolved, they stay with us.
Yeah, there's
life. And we struggle to get whatever needs were meant to be met. The Greek legend of pushing the boulder over and over.
Sure.
It's true.
Yeah.
Psychologically.
There's no doubt that.
And is this where this, I'm going to have a life after death to finally get these needs met?
Yeah. I think it's simple. I think life after death is the fact that we don't want to die. We've never been dead. We don't want to die.
We want these needs to be met.
Yeah. Is it? What do you think? Are we close? Is there time for one last? Anybody want to do any housekeeping? Everything good? All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank Jerry and Ethan for a really thought-provoking discussion. Thank you all.